Welcome to the Ketones and Coffee Podcast with Lawrence Manaig, where we explore the ketogenic lifestyle and how it can improve your physical and mental health. Each week, we bring you valuable insights and advice from experts to help you on your journey to a healthier lifestyle. This episode is brought to you by BasicKetogenicLifestyle.com, where Lawrence coaches individuals with depression to reverse their symptoms and achieve a healthier, happier life using an evidence-based approach. So sit back, relax, and join us as we dive deep into the world of ketones and coffee. Subscribe to the Ketones and Coffee Podcast today and never miss an episode.
Dr. Chris Knobbe is a physician and a nutrition researcher who has been investigating the dangers of seed oils for over a decade. He is the founder and director of two foundations, the Cure AMD Foundation and the Ancestral Health Foundation. Dr. Knobbe is most famous for his groundbreaking work on age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, and authored the book, The Ancestral Dietary Strategy to Prevent and Treat Macular Degeneration, back in 2016. Today, he joins us to talk about his new book, The Ancestral Diet Revolution, which sheds light on how vegetable oil and processed foods are destroying our health. Dr. Chris Knobbe, who has dedicated the last 10 years to researching the power of food in preventing chronic diseases. Dr. Knobbe, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Lawrence. It's a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
You know, your work on the dangers of seed oils is truly groundbreaking. I've seen some of your talk online and read a few pages of your book, and we are eager to really dive deeper into that topic today. Your book, The Ancestral Diet Revolution, can be a great resource for anyone who wants to learn more about this. And if you're interested, it sheds light on how our food choices can really impact our overall health. And it's, essentially talking about, the seed oils and how it leads to chronic diseases like obesity, the bigger ones, diabetes. And I'm, as passionate of an advocate as the next person for just the importance of nutrition in overall wellness. So I'm thrilled to have you, sir, and discuss that important issue.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence. It's a pleasure, and you've already summarized what we need. The main things we need to hit. That it is processed foods, and it is the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils that are the primary drivers. And I'll just say that, if it weren't for the work of Weston A. Price, I don't know if your listeners are aware of Weston A. Price's research, but if I might mention, Lawrence, Price was a highly accomplished scientist, researcher, and dentist who in the 1930s, traveled much of the world visiting people, evaluating people on 5 continents, 14 nations, hundreds of tribes and villages, and thousands upon thousands of individual evaluations and exams. And at the time, people were transitioning. It was a unique time in the history of the world. People were transitioning from their native traditional diets over to westernized diets. And what Price found is, as those people began to consume our westernized foods, what a lot of them called the foods of the white man, they developed dental decay and arthritis, cancers, and a load of degenerative diseases. And the reason I'm pointing this out partly is that Price connected this to what he called the problems were refined flours, refined sugars, canned goods, sweets, confectionery, that's how he labeled them, and vegetable fats, he called them, which are the vegetable oils. And this was something that I came across Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, back in 2013. And after I read this 500-page epic book that is staggering in its accomplishments, it changed my world, and and for the first time ever, I had a lens through which I could view all of nutrition, and that guides me to this day. I use that, and the fact that he nailed vegetable fats as well when they were very low in the diet, but he knew that they were nutrient deficient. He didn't understand the toxicity because there was no way to understand the toxicity of these oils back in that day. But he knew that those were the foods that were nutrient deficient, that were very, very low in vitamins and minerals, and that was driving degenerative disease. And so ever since then, that's the lens that I see all of this through. And again, I think I said this, but it's never failed me. So it's just brilliant. That's where all of my research is focused on.
So we'll get to those topics in a second here, Dr. Chris. I believe, when I was looking into your story, your journey hasn't always been easy. As as like most of us who changed your lifestyle, your dedication, I can see that you're spreading the important message there. Very incredible, and a decade of research, your speaking engagement, and then your book writing a testament is a testament to that mission. Can you tell us, to our listeners, more about your background as a physician, and then I understand some health problems in your 30s, I believe, and then what led you to, you spoke about it a little bit, to becoming a nutrition researcher.
Yeah. So, my story really begins back in like 1994 when I was 33 years old, and I began to develop arthritis in my knees. And by the time I was 50 in 2011, I had arthritis in many joints, and including my elbows and shoulders and fingers and toes, but to keep this short, I did a partial paleo diet, and for a while it helped me. And over the last 12 years, also, just to summarize this, I've tried virtually everything, and it's funny you ask me this now, because just in the last several weeks, I finally uncovered what I think may be the answer, and it's that this is the first time I've ever mentioned this publicly, is that I have gout, which is a uric acid accumulation, and I've probably seen 30 physicians in my in the last 29 years, about my arthritis, and nobody ever mentioned gout, but I had a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Ben Edwards, who's a brilliant physician, and he said, Chris, this is, because I was getting worse this year, and even a carnivore diet wouldn't solve it, which it did before. It seemed to solve it pretty well, but a carnivore diet wouldn't touch it either, and I was getting, like I said, I was getting worse, and Dr. Ben Edwards, family physician, brilliant guy, said it's either going to be an infectious agent or it's going to be a toxin. And it led me on a search finally, that I found that the most inflammatory and painful arthritis is gout. And so I was tested, and my uric acid was a bit high, and my 24-hour urine uric acid was more than twice the average of a typical healthy male, nailing the diagnosis. And so now I'm on treatment for gout. But anyway, this is what. But back in 2011, when I went, kind of a paleo diet, I did have, for a while, I did have a great improvement in my arthritis, and it led me to read Lauren Cordain's book, The Paleo Answer, and I was just absolutely blown away, because I was trained in a traditional allopathic medical school, the University of Colorado School of Medicine. I graduated 33 years ago, back in 1990. And I don't think we honestly even had 5 minutes worth of nutrition training. And if we had anything, it was wrong, Lawrence. It was wrong. And so I uncovered that after I read an article by Nina Teicholz in 2007 in what was my journal on health back then, which was Men's Fitness. I think is what it was, because I wasn't researching nutrition in those days. But her article, which I think followed some of Gary Taub's work, opened my eyes to the fact that the Maasai of Kenya and Tanzania consumed a massive amount of saturated fat and had no heart disease. And I knew at the end of this 10 or 12 page article or whatever it is that allopathic medicine is wrong, absolutely wrong. And so, I began at that point to distrust allopathic medicine, at least in terms of their advice about nutrition, which was, it was either little or none or wrong. Right. And so anyway, that's kind of been, so my journey really is born out of my own suffering. And like a lot of the people in this space, there's so many physicians, as you know, that have gotten into nutrition research because of their own suffering or their own overweight or diabetes or even heart disease, all these things. And that modern medicine has misled us down to go down the wrong path. And when I look back at it, quite frankly, when I read Lauren Cordain's book, The Paleo Answer, in 2011, which I read while basking in the sun in Cabo San Lucas for a week, I was absolutely stunned that all of this chronic disease, heart disease, cancer, strokes, and all these things I understand now that is driven by modern processed food, it was just life altering. And that started my journey. But I had differences with very early on with Lauren Cordain's work. There were some differences, and I have immense respect for Lauren Cordain, but we do have a couple of differences. And now I'm friends with him. And it's okay that we have differences. Everybody does. And but anyway, so that led me down my own path to try to understand nutrition in a better way. And to this day, some 12 years later, I still look at all of this, and I hear people on podcasts and so forth, and I still think, my gosh, I've got so much to learn. This field is so big, and there is so much to learn. So I've got a long ways to go still.
I love that story, and I love that journey. And, everybody that I've had on the show had some sort of, their own path to take, right? And yourself, you had your own path when you had been suffering from arthritis for those few years. And now it's taking you to, discovering more and more about yourself and meeting a lot of people who are in the space, making friends, and now helping a lot of people, create that same change in others, in themselves, and meeting others. Thank you so much for telling that story, which is great. And what now led to you, finding out about vegetable oils? Now, no, you talked a little bit about changing your lifestyle to a more paleo diet, and what came next after that?
Yeah, good question. So in 2013, after I read after I read Weston A. Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, I began to ruminate on that for months, and by that point, I was understanding that at least I knew that processed foods, which included refined flours, sugars, and vegetable oils, and trans fats, those are driving all this chronic disease: coronary heart disease, strokes, cancers, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity. I knew that was the cause. And all of a sudden, one day, as an ophthalmologist, I'd been in practice, for more than 20 years at that point, and taken care of thousands and thousands of patients with age-related macular degeneration, which is a degenerate, as the name implies, is a degenerative disease of the macula, the central retina, which accounts for your central vision. And it just, this light bulb went on. I thought, could the processed foods be driving this disease as well? And I looked and looked. I spent weeks, investigating the literature just to see, had anyone ever hypothesized this? And I couldn't find that this was anywhere in the scientific literature or in the non-scientific literature, as far as I could tell. And so that was in late 2013, and I began to investigate that question for about the next year and a half. And by February of 2015, I was so convinced that hypothesis, that just processed foods were driving age-related macular degeneration, that I felt compelled to leave practice to pursue that full time, and that's what I did. And I worked with a number of ophthalmologists in the South Pacific Islands, but primarily I worked with a nutrition researcher by the name of Maria Stoyanowska from Macedonia, who is an extraordinary researcher and dedicated to helping. And she was an expert at mining vegetable oil and sugar data out of existing databases, and that's what she helped me do. And we worked on that for about a year together. And then I waited, excitedly and in fear about, as the data came in, whether or not it would support the hypothesis. And lo and behold, in 25 nations, the data supported the hypothesis in every single case. But what was interesting was that 3 of the nations that we dug data out of and worked with Pacific Island ophthalmologists, where they have almost no macular degeneration. Those islands had, at least according to the FAO, they had virtually no vegetable oil consumption.
Wow.
And they had no macular degeneration. And even in the island, the nation and island of Kiribati, the sugar consumption was high, but the vegetable oil consumption was extremely low. It was almost zero, and they had virtually no macular degeneration. And so anyway, I eventually published a paper on this and published a book and started a nonprofit foundation, and accomplished that by 2017. But I kept coming back to the fact that the more I investigated, the more I looked at it, I found out that the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils contain a lot of omega-6 fatty acids. This is linoleic acid, it accounts for 90% of the omega-6 fat in whatever you would get in your omega-6 out of your diet. 90% of that, roughly, is going to be omega-6 linoleic acid. And I found all the evidence that these oils in higher amounts are pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, directly toxic to cells, and nutrient deficient, meaning they don't have the fat-soluble vitamins like the animal fats would be associated with. And so those are the 4 pillars of hazard, I call that drove me to keep investigating and dig for more and more data to see, does this data support the hypothesis that it's the high omega-6 seed oils driving the primary drivers. And this is what, as you probably have seen, that I've connected this, and I'm a data junkie. I mean, I live by data. I figure if you don't have data, you can't prove anything. And so this is what I've done, which hasn't been done for the most part. I've worked with some other investigators to help me put together data that shows that over and over, what we see is the vegetable oils going up right along with obesity, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, age-related macular degeneration, dementia, probably the autoimmune diseases, and the list goes on. And it's the same thing if you look at it historically. It's exact same situation with what would be the number 1 killer, which is coronary heart disease. Because if you go back to the 19th century, we know that I've looked at all this in great detail, and this is in my book, and it's I've reviewed this in many presentations, that coronary heart disease was just virtually unknown in the world in the 19th century. Between 1800 and 1900, there's 8 papers on coronary heart disease. 8. There'll probably be 8 papers published on coronary heart disease while we make this, this podcast. And but anyway, that's how rare it was, and only two of those, possibly 3, depending on how you want to evaluate those papers, reviewed thrombotic coronary heart disease, which is the equivalent of a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. And so that's how rare it was. In other words, the physicians, without getting into the great detail, the physicians of that era, they'd never seen a heart attack. They never witnessed a heart attack. Now, some of them they'd witnessed angina, chest pain, but for the most part, they'd never seen a heart attack. James Herrick published the first known heart attack in 1912 in the United States,
Wow.
and documented that with autopsy evidence. So in 1910, if you want to think of it this way, there's virtually no physician had seen a heart attack, and no one had seen a heart attack. They didn't know what it was. In fact, they thought, cardiology it seemed an absurd specialty in that time because nobody had any troubles with the heart that weren't valvular, which came out of infectious disease, syphilis, endocarditis, and I'm blanking on the third, but anyway, rheumatic fever, and but by the 1930s, coronary heart disease had become the leading cause of death in the United States. And so why is this? Well, vegetable oils were introduced in the United States right after the American Civil War, ending in 1865, as a food. They were introduced in 1866, really, and Americans didn't want vegetable oils. They first of all, they weren't called vegetable oils. The first one, that was available was cottonseed oil. In other words, I'm saying there was, olive oil had been available in extraordinarily small amounts, for millennia, but no one had ever, had any other oil available as a food, and Americans didn't want what was being introduced, cottonseed oil. They didn't want that because they knew that they had associated that with being a lamp oil or a machine oil or potentially even fertilizer back at that time. But the manufacturers, they just were looking for profits, and they decided that what they did was they began to mix the cottonseed oil with butter to make margarine. That was one of the first ways to get it into the food supply. And the second thing they did was they began to adulterate olive oil in the 1870s with cottonseed oil. And I think we sent some huge number, like 80,000 barrels or something like that, to Europe in 1880. And the French made complaint because they knew it wasn't olive oil. We were supposed to be sending olive oil, and they knew by the taste of it that it wasn't olive oil, that it was adulterated with something else, which was our cottonseed oil. And then, of course, eventually, in Procter & Gamble created Crisco, which is partially hydrogenated fat, and that they used the way they made that was they took cottonseed oil and you bubble hydrogen gas through it in the presence of a metal catalyst, and that produces these trans fats, the partially hydrogenated oils. But it was firm, as everybody knows, and it looked kind of like lard. So their goals were to, ultimately the goals of these manufacturers was to replace butter and lard. They were going to outsell them, and indeed that's exactly what they did. They told Americans it was healthy, and they had an extraordinary campaign, and that's how they gradually. So this became the perfect storm. They gradually got these oils into the food supply. They hid them in the food supply. They adulterated foods. They made margarine, they made Crisco, and gradually we became sick. And I think it was, and while we were being told that they're healthy, right? And so when coronary heart disease became the leading cause of death, people weren't looking at the history really, and something that precious few, researchers have ever done is look at the entire history and say, well, what changed in the environment, in the food supply? And all along, it's been, you just see this enormous curve of increase. So I'll just give a couple numbers here, Lorenzo, and I'll shut up. But, if you look 1865, and this is published, vegetable oil consumption was zero in the United States. There would have been an extraordinarily small amount of olive oil. It would have been far less than 1/10 of a gram per person per day. So it's completely negligible. By 1900, vegetable oil consumption, which was only cottonseed oil, was less than a gram a day, or probably a half a gram to a gram a day, somewhere in there. By 1960, we're at 19.5 grams a day. 1961 on average in the United States, and by 2010, we're at 80 grams of vegetable oil per person per day. So what is that? That is 80 grams of fat is 720 calories. That's 32% of U.S. caloric intake. And as you look at that, what we see is over that time, we've become progressively more obese, more diabetic, more metabolic syndrome, more Alzheimer's, more dementia, more macular degeneration, more autoimmune, right? All in line with this.
Wow. There's just a lot of information here, and thank you so much for
Yeah.
telling that story because, first of all, it was interesting that when you quit your practice, it must have been so evident to you that you had to really, take your time and do it full time. So, and then you were right at the end because all 25 nations, you said, right?
Yeah.
All 25 nations has found that, the leading cause would have been vegetable oil.
Yes.
And, I recently watched one of your talks, obesity, diabetes, and chronic disease, and also was listening to your interview with Casey Ryan on the Boundless Body Radio. Shout out Casey. And there was this show he mentioned called How It's Made. The the episode was about seed oil, and I've seen that episode and how they make them, and it's incredibly processed. And it's a miracle on how they were able to even extract oil from that, right? It had to go through this whole chemical process, like you mentioned earlier, and that fact that it's used everywhere and it's hidden everywhere, and you believe that vegetable oil is killing us, is responsible for obesity and diabetes. So you talked about this as the vegetable oil's popularity grows, obesity rates also skyrocketed. You spoke about this correlation earlier. The upward trajectory of obesity and the increase of usage of vegetables are undeniable. It's right there. My question is, that's really concerning, and with something so dangerous, why do you think the general public hasn't fully grasped the severity of this issue? Because they're still using it. My mom, she still wouldn't listen. I don't think they're getting that message to the household. The household doesn't know it. Doesn't know this yet. But if you want to see the graph, you can go. Where can they see the graph, doctor?
I probably one of my most viewed presentations was if they just Google Chris Knobbe, Knobbe, I'm sorry, YouTube, low carb Denver. This is back when I was a young man. My hair was dark. That's another part of my nutrition journey. But anyway, I review a lot of this there. I've got many presentations. People would want to view my Ancestral Health Symposium presentations. I've covered a lot of this in those. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why do you think the general public hasn't fully grasped? This is something so dangerous, right?
Right. Well, it's for good reason. They've been told it's healthy, and if you go back in history a ways back to 1960 at 61, is when this has been talked about too much. I won't go into detail, but Ansel Keys was the physiologist and researcher at the University of Minnesota that influenced the American Heart Association so greatly, together with a group of like-minded influencers, they influenced the American Heart Association to endorse the idea that saturated fats cause heart disease, and vegetable oils in lower in saturated fat, would have benefits. And this really stuck, and this was the belief system that's guided medicine's endorsement of vegetable oils ever since. And so we have our major organizations today, like the Harvard School of Public Health, Tufts University's Nutrition Department, Mayo Clinic's Nutrition Department, Cleveland Clinic's Nutrition Department, of course the American Heart Association to this day. They're all recommending you consume vegetable oils and keep your saturated fat low. Like even the World Health Organization still tells us today, keep your saturated fat under 10%, and the American Heart Association says no more than 5 to 6%. So they're telling people consume these vegetable oils, and I'm telling people these are chronic metabolic biological poisons, and they are because of the high omega-6 and the fact that they also contain toxic aldehydes. And if they don't contain these toxic aldehydes, which we can get into if you want to, but if they don't contain them, you will produce them in your body when you consume these high levels of omega-6 fat, which we accumulate in our body. And sets off this, this whole pro-oxidative environment.
And thank you for just telling about that history, because I think that's really important to know, because without telling that history, there's no way for people to understand why this is happening. You mentioned Ansel Keys and his hypothesis and anything that and then you mentioned the American Heart Association, which funds most of these organizations, funds most of this research, right? And this is just what I heard, and whenever something opposes their hypothesis, they are quick to shut it down or not fund them and not publish them. That's what I heard, and that's what I believe that causes that major issue, because it's that agenda that we talk about. That's really
the big food and the vegetable oil organizations are funding some of our major nutrition organizations, and this is why, like Tufts University, their recent, I forget what it's called, but their recommendations for healthy food includes a bunch of ridiculously processed foods. I can't think of what they are right off the top of my head, but why is that? Well, this is where their funding is coming from, is from big food and vegetable oil manufacturers, so because they have very deep pockets and they can fund a lot of this research. They're influencing the research, and they're influencing these organizations, and but Americans are not stupid, and they for example, there's a published article that shows that I think it was 70% of Americans believe that coconut oil, which is the highest saturated fat oil there is, it only has 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. It's 91 to 95% saturated fat. Americans believe, 70% of them, that coconut oil is healthy. But guess what? Harvard tells us it's dangerous, right? That's what they tell us, that it's a dangerous fat. And so this is proof that Americans are waking up and they're saying, look, we cannot trust Harvard, and I think there's, in essence, they're saying we can't trust Tufts, or the nutrition departments at Tufts and Mayo and Cleveland Clinic and so on, when they're telling us to consume these vegetable oils. They're starting to get the idea. I think a lot of people are starting to get the idea that these oils are indeed dangerous. And I'll just say one other thing, Lawrence, is that if you ask the question, well, why do they recommend these organizations like Harvard? Why are they recommending vegetable oils? What possible good could there come from it? And there's one reason. I've looked and looked and looked, and I can't come up with any other thing other than one reason, and it's the fact that they lower LDL cholesterol. And indeed they do. And I kind of half in jest say, when I'm speaking live on stage, so does arsenic lower LDL cholesterol. And it does. And it does it for the same reasons that I think that, vegetable oils lower LDL cholesterol, because they both are strong oxidants. And oxidation, which is like rusting inside your body, is an incredibly dangerous process. I mean, a good dose of arsenic will kill you in a day. Why? Because of oxidation. And guess what? This is exactly what vegetable oils are doing to us, except they don't do it in a day. I don't think if you drink a half a gallon of vegetable oil that you'll die tonight. But but they're killing us over a long period of time because they're chronic metabolic biological poisons. Then they accomplish this primarily through oxidation. And so vegetable oils, the omega-6, is incorporated into LDL cholesterol, and it causes, because those are unsaturated fats, which are highly prone to oxidation, the LDL cholesterol oxidizes, and when it oxidizes, we call it a different name, LDL ox for oxidation, and that is the LDL that is then taken up into your arteries in the form of atherosclerotic plaques. It's pulled out of circulation and pulled into the through the endothelium and into the adventitia, where it begins and propagates an atherosclerotic plaque. And so, yes, this is why your cholesterol does go down. And for exactly the wrong reason that you hoped it would, right? And so, there's so much evidence that LDL cholesterol, if it's unoxidized, it has no danger whatsoever. So this is why, if you look at LDL cholesterol, it can be all over the board and has absolutely almost zero relationship with coronary heart disease. It has to be oxidized.
The way we talk about vegetable oil right now, if you're listening, you have to stop using it right away, because look at, what we've described here. It's heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes. All of these are in the top killers in America, right? So are we saying if we just stop taking in vegetable oil, cooking it with vegetable oil? But the problem is now, Dr. Chris, it's hidden everywhere. Like your pastry has it, your fast food has it. It's everywhere, and it's like, how should we look at vegetable oil now? Like, now that we know this information, you mentioned, you talked about vegetable are killing us, and it's hidden everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. How do you look at vegetable now, personally?
Yeah, so let me say that I think, the big picture to me is really simple. I just tell people, you have to, if you want to be healthy or get healthy, if you have any chronic disease conditions, you have to eliminate vegetable oil. Now it's harder than it sounds, but here's how you can simplify that: is prepare your own food. And let me name these highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils, the ones that I would tell everybody to get off their list, and they're soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, and peanut oils. Those are the ones that are high in omega-6 linoleic acid. They're all above 20% omega-6 linoleic acid. They range from 20% with canola oil up to 78% with safflower oil. And the two most commonly used oils in the United States by far and away, number one is soybean oil, and it's about 54 to 56% omega-6 linoleic acid. And again, that's the omega-6 component that we want to avoid at all costs. Well, let's contrast that to what is the omega-6 linoleic acid in butter, good quality lard, coming from pigs raised naturally and not on corn and soy, and or even chicken fat on chickens raised naturally without corn and soy, which raises their omega-6. But anyway, those animals, their omega-6 and their body fat will all be around 2 to 2.5%, or even lower. Butter is roughly 1.5% to 2% omega-6 linoleic acid, and that's where all the natural animal fats would be. And of course, this is the added fats that have been staples of diets worldwide for all of history. And so this is what you need to go back to. But how do you do that? Is I think you have to eliminate processed foods, and you have to be extraordinarily careful if you're eating out. And today, I think the statistic that I recall is that Americans are consuming about 50% of their foods away from home. meaning those are foods prepared in restaurants or prepared in their fast food, which is about 18% of the American diet, or in cafeterias, like at hospitals, which serve terrible food because they endorse this idea of vegetables. Like they typically are going to put soybean or canola in their foods, and so this is all exceedingly dangerous. So I say the number one way to get healthy and eliminate these oils is prepare your own food. Like, we prepare, and I cook all the time, but we prepare like around, I would say close to 95% of our food at home. And then you're in complete control, and you can cook with, I would say cook with butter, unless you can't tolerate butter for some reason. Coconut oil would be your next best choice, or palm kernel oil. Those are both 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. Olive oil is, this is a complicated topic, but I'll try to simplify. Olive oil on average is about 10% omega-6 linoleic acid, but it runs the gamut from around 2% up to 3% up to 22% omega-6 linoleic acid. So you don't know what you're getting. Number two is that 79% of the olive oil in the United States is either adulterated or can't meet good quality criteria set forth by the North American Olive Oil Association, that whatever that is, the NAOAA, I believe it is, I've got those wrong. But anyway, North American Olive Oil Association is what qualifies those. And so here, the problem is you've got 8 out of 10 bottles of so-called olive oil are they're poor quality, and or a whole lot of those are adulterated. Again, this adulteration that began in the 1870s in the U.S. of oils, it continues, and it's even worse today. And it's true in Europe and probably everywhere, because there's a whole underground operation adulterating these oils for profit. So you have to be, so if you're going to consume olive oil, I'd say make absolutely certain that you've proven for sure it is an authentic, fresh oil. I would probably want to visit the company that where the olives are grown, and see it and know for sure that that's what you're consuming. Otherwise, I think you got to be very careful. You have to do a lot of investigation if you're going to consume olive oil.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And also, I want to go back, Dr. Chris, to the heart disease point, because so are we saying that the fact that we have it wrong of what causes heart disease, that's been causing this rise in vegetable usage? Because if vegetable oil has never been discovered, then you're saying we wouldn't have any obesity epidemic or heart disease epidemic, basically.
Yeah, I think we wouldn't. Now, if your diet was, you can have a terrible diet without vegetable oil by eating processed foods that don't have vegetable oil, and you will get degenerative diseases, just as Weston Price found back in the 1930s. I think if you don't have any vegetable oils at all, your risk of having obesity and probably diabetes drops incredibly to incredibly low levels. I think it's almost impossible to develop diabetes without a higher omega-6 diet. But let's just say that if your diet is, loaded with sugar and refined flours, but no vegetable oils, you're going to get degenerative disease, and that will include dental decay and probably arthritis, and may even involve, probably will involve a substantially higher risk of cancer. So you don't want that either. And the worst case scenario is when you put all that together. So you have a nutrient deficient diet with significant added sugars and refined flours, again, processed foods, and then you have the vegetable oils you put in there, which creates, even further nutrient deficiency, plus all the pro-oxidative and toxic environment. And now you've got the perfect storm to create just massive disease. And this is exactly where we are today, especially in the United States, which is that, we have the highest obesity in the world of all the developed nations, 42.5% obesity in 2018. We rank amongst the highest of the developed nations in diabetes. We're really just about the worst in most metrics.
The fact that we are a calories in, calories out nation, that that's what the doctors say too. You have to lose weight, exercise more. The fact that they say that, I think, adds on to this problem, because if someone's obese and your doctor says you just got to eat less, exercise more, no mention of vegetable oil, no mention of sugar or carbs, no mention of anything, but just eating less and exercising more. It puts the blame and the onus on the person who's suffering from obesity, not vegetable oil. I think adds on to
exactly.
that. It's that mindset of if you're fat, you got to eat less, exercise more, and go on a low fat diet.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think Robert Lustig said a long time ago, if telling people to eat less and exercise more worked, we would have this would have been solved a long time ago. It's a dangerous message, and it's a message that is just absolutely 100% wrong.
Irresponsible.
It is irresponsible.
If this is what you say, if vegetable oils are actually killing us, and I believe so, right? Because I've taken it out of my diet and I feel great, and I've seen a lot of people change their lifestyle and how they how they have reverse chronic illnesses like type 2 diabetes and obesity. I believe it so much, but as you can say, if vegetable oils are killing us, then since it's everywhere, it's in baked goods, right? It's in processed foods, it's in fast foods. It's really hard to really push this message out. And I have you seen any pushback or anything from your community that have you seen that tried to silence you in any way?
I'll tell you, it's been incredibly hard to publish this evidence. We're up against that as we speak. There has not, we tried, including some of my ophthalmology colleagues, we tried for several years to get on stages to present this at conferences, and with retina specialist colleagues included in my group, and we were turned down every single time. And I stopped even submitting abstracts back in 2019 or 2020 because it was just at this point a total waste in time until we get more papers published. They don't want to hear it. So there's been a lot of pushback there. I will say, quite frankly, that some of the low carb community does not appreciate my work, because this work shows that it's really not about macronutrient ratios. We see macronutrient ratios in healthy populations that are all over the board. I've presented on this many times now that for example, I'll just give a couple of examples that I've shown that, like the Maasai warriors of Kenya and Tanzania, their diet is 66% animal fat, 14% carbohydrate, and where do they get all their fat? It's all coming from milk, and their cows put out very, very high amount of fat. But anyway, so 66% animal fat, their diet's 40 to 46% saturated animal fat. They're incredibly healthy people. They don't have heart disease. They don't have diabetes. They don't have obesity, or even overweight, really. They're incredibly lean that should tell us everything we need to know about saturated fat right there. The Tokelauans, traditionally, their diet was, based largely on coconut, coconut, fish, starchy tubers, and fruit. Their diet is 50% saturated fat in the men, 51% saturated fat in the women, I believe it was, or 49 and 51. But anyway, they average 50% saturated fat in their diet. That's the highest saturated fat diet in the world. They have no heart disease, no diabetes, virtually no obesity. They're incredibly healthy. The Papua New Guineans of Tukasinta, shown way back by Sinnott and White, studied them for 4 years. It's the most comprehensive study of a hunter-gatherer population in all of history, and one of the most well-completed, constructed studies. The Papua New Guineans of Tukasinta were consuming more than 90% of their diet as sweet potatoes. Their diet was 94.6% carbohydrate, 3% fat, 2.4% protein, and yet they were lean, fit, had no diabetes, had no heart disease. They weren't perfect health. They had dental decay that was severe, and they had arthritis that was pretty severe. And I think this was primarily driven by the fact that they had so little animal foods, which I'm sorry I didn't mention, was they would occasionally feast on pork and chicken. So they're the closest population I've ever seen to being completely vegan. But they're not vegan. They would feast on pork when they could, but it wasn't very often, and they would rarely eat chicken. But anyway, but that gives them so little fat-soluble vitamins. I think that drove this, their dental decay and their joint decay, leading to the arthritis. Perhaps it could be that the high sweet potatoes is driving high oxalate too. That could be an issue. I don't know for sure. The Okinawans, and I might be going on here too long, but the Okinawans, very similar to the Papua New Guineans of the Tukasinta in a lot of ways. Their diet up through 1950 was, and based on centuries of evidence, was 85% sweet potatoes. And then they consumed significant pork and then vegetables. But that was their diet traditionally. And then after 1950, their diet started going down in sweet potatoes, and they began to consume more westernized foods, right? And they began to consume more vegetable oils. But in 1960, they were in phenomenal health at a diet of 84%. The same with the mainland Japanese, whose diet was all white rice. I mean, it was 84% white rice. They were both in phenomenal health, but over the next 5 decades, their carbohydrates went down, their total calories went down, their sugar went down after 1989, but their vegetable oils went from 9 grams a day in 1961 up to 39 grams a day, a 4.5-fold increase by 2004, I believe it was. And with that, obesity in the men during that period doubled. It went from 16% to 31% approximately. Breast cancer went up 5-fold during that period. Multiple other cancers went up, double to triple or more. Age-related macular degeneration went up 82-fold from 0.2% in the 1970s to 16.37%, I believe it was, by 2013. 82-fold increase in macular degeneration. And then the one that tops them all, diabetes, went from 0.02% in 1954 to I think it's 6 point something percent in about 2007, I believe. Anyway, it went up 345-fold in diabetes. So while their calories went down, their carbohydrates went down, and their sugar was going down after 1989, their diabetes and obesity and cancers, all going through the roof, right? There's really what are you going to point your finger at? And their smoking went way down. during that period. It went way down from 78%, or I believe it was in 60 in the 19 around 1960 down to 40 some percent by the 2000s. So yeah, the evidence just always leads me back to it's highly polyunsaturated vegetable oil.
If
So
there's any takeaway here, Dr. Chris, I think we talk about just as you can see, like at this point for generations we are genetically compromised. Like it Americans, or they've been eating this way for generations, and we're genetically compromised. And I believe that having to go into, I mean, people in the low carb world or keto world, right? I believe going into ketosis, having that therapeutic effect, has that effect on our bodies to heal itself. But I believe what you're saying, that and there's proof in the pudding here. You talked about the evidence that we have in front of us. As you can see, like vegetable oils today, 51% of Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. This is in 2016, and 34 million are diabetic. So there's evidence there, and if you guys, all the listeners right now, if you guys can go to Dr. Chris Knobbe, we'll link it down in the description box below. Watch his full presentation on this topic, and I believe that this will shed some light on those pressing questions that you have right now. Go there, and there will be your questions will be answered over there. But like I said, I'm open to learning a lot more about this and reading more about more about your book, the Ancestral. What was that called? Sorry.
The Ancestral Diet Revolution. I have to think about it myself. Yeah.
The Ancestral Diet Revolution. And there's a lot here that I want to get into. And
it should be published on May 15th.
Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
Now, could I just interject one thing here, Lawrence, is that I do believe that in general that the low carb diets have helped people substantially more than low fat, but I believe, and I've been investigating this and actually presenting on this since 2019 at the Ancestral Health Symposium. I first presented this evidence that I think the main reason that low carb is working is because first, I don't even talk about this so much, but if you go low carb, you obviously you're getting rid of sugar and refined flours, right? So that's beneficial right there if you do that. Number two, though, and I think even more important, is that the carbohydrates are associated with vegetable oils in processed food, in restaurant food, and in fast food. So think about it. It's the potatoes, the rice, and the pasta, and even the bread that is associated with vegetable oils. So if you just eliminate those, even though you don't really think about the fact that you're getting rid of these oils, but if you don't have French fries, you don't have potato chips, you don't have pancakes made in cooked in vegetable oil, you just go on and on. All these rice dishes, like a lot of the Asian dishes, they're all being cooked in vegetable oil now. Like Chinese restaurants, Japanese restaurants, Korean restaurants, and Indian restaurants. I can't find none of them are cooking with animal fat. A lot of them don't even. Most restaurants, especially fast food restaurants, they're never going to have butter. Mm-hmm. They're not going to have even a gram of butter in the restaurant. They have 5-gallon containers of vegetable oil, and that's what goes into their food. So in other words, when you go low carb, you're dropping your omega-6 typically without even realizing it. I think this is the primary reason that low carb is working. But if people understand this, in my view, then it opens up the possibility to change your diet in a way that works better for you. So I support low carb. I support low fat. Bodybuilders bodybuilders are, historically, I've been in gyms, for 40 years, and I've been around had a lot of bodybuilder friends, and they're all low fat guys, pretty much. Until recently, they've almost all been low fat, and it's published scientific evidence in the 90s too. Their diets were some of them very, very low fat, like 10% fat. They use upwards of, and they consider carbs much more valuable and important to them than protein even, because carbohydrates are protein sparing, they're muscle sparing. And so it's very interesting, the leanest guys on the planet, the bodybuilders, they're using high carb diets to get there usually. Only in the last decade have I seen any bodybuilders using low carb diets.
Yeah,
Other than for cutting, like they do it for cutting, but then they go back to their high carb, to for the show.
That's a great point, because nowadays, now we talk about sugary baked goods they use vegetable oils. Restaurants use vegetable oils, and just cutting out the junk foods, the chips and everything, the processed foods. You'll feel so much better, right?
Right.
And now we talked about getting rid of the sugar, getting rid of refined carbohydrates, and what I think eliminating those things are one thing, and another thing for me for keto is its therapeutic effects now, because when you're on ketosis, you release beta hydroxybutyrate, which is a ketone body that's made by the liver, and that has therapeutic effects too in repairing the cells in the mitochondria, and that has a therapeutic effect in mental health, and then just your overall health. I believe that is too. And I know you talked about the elimination part of things, which is very, very important in changing your lifestyle. And most of the things that if you just cut the process, just cut the seed oils that you use at home, you'll feel so much better. I guarantee.
Yeah.
Without even going to ketosis, without even going to keto.
Right. And I would say to people, wouldn't it be phenomenal to know that you cannot die of heart disease, the number one killer, and you cannot die or ever get a major cancer? I believe you can know that. And I believe if you go on an ancestral diet and you have a nutrient dense diet, which may include foods like liver or cold pressed cod liver oil, for example. So make sure your vitamins A, D, and K2 are high, and you're not getting any of these toxic foods. You've eliminated the processed foods, and I believe, in general, probably if you've done this for 3 to 5 years, I don't think you can get I don't think you can die of heart disease, and I don't think that it's possible to develop a major cancer at all. I think it will almost entirely go away unless you're exposed to a major carcinogen. And even if you are exposed to major carcinogens, the evidence shows that if you drop your omega-6 linoleic acid consumption down to less than 2%, and even as low as 1% or less, which is ancestral. I make a big point of this in the book, that it's very, very, very difficult to develop cancer, even if exposed to radiation or carcinogens. And I think it's just great to know these things, and you can reverse diabetes doing this. This is how you reverse diabetes: is you go to a low omega-6 diet. You just eliminate the vegetable oils, and you eliminate the high omega-6 from animals that are fed corn and soy. Be pigs and chickens that are fed that and have a high omega-6. But this is how you get healthy and stay healthy, and you prevent all this disease.
This is great. This is great news for a lot of people, because if we say that we don't have to be on a certain diet and just get rid of seed oils, now I know that it also means that you're baking your own baked goods, you're baking your own cookies or whatever, or you're not going to restaurants anymore, because like you mentioned earlier, there's not many that doesn't anymore these days, right? and
Right.
you just eliminate seed oils makes it a lot simpler for people to understand, and which is awesome for a lot of people. It's great news for a lot of people. Dr. Chris, thank you so much for coming on and sharing that story with us and sharing your knowledge about this topic. This is great news for a lot of people.
Yes, Lorenzo, I appreciate you having me on. And here at the very end, I kept meaning every time you called me Dr. Chris, I kept meaning to say you don't. It's just Chris. I don't let anybody call me doctor really. So anyway, I appreciate it though, and it's been an honor to be on your show.
It's my honor, Dr. Chris Knobbe. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us today. If you guys want to grab the book, it's out on May 15th, right?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
we'll link it all in the description box below, guys. And yeah, I hope you guys are taking notes. There's a lot here, and I would recommend following Dr. Chris Knobbe. He's all over YouTube. He has tremendous work on vegetable oils and this topic. So get on that, guys. And I myself will have to learn more about this and educate myself on this. And it was a pleasure, Dr. Chris Knobbe.
It was my pleasure, Lorenz. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, sir.